The summer of 2014 in Medford, Oregon, was one for the memory books, a tapestry of sun-drenched days and the distant, cheerful hum of lawnmowers. For the Sullivan family, it was supposed to be a season of scraped knees, ice-cream-stained shirts, and the boundless energy of their 7-year-old twin boys, Liam and Noah. But on July 15th, the idyllic summer shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The laughter that usually echoed from their sprawling backyard fell silent, replaced by a stillness that was heavy and unnatural. Karen Sullivan, their mother, remembers the exact moment that dread began to curdle in her stomach. It was the chilling quiet that first alerted her that something was terribly wrong. Liam and Noah were inseparable, two halves of a whole, distinguished only by a small crescent-shaped scar above Liam's right eyebrow. They were last seen playing near the ancient oak tree that dominated their backyard, its thick branches a familiar jungle gym. They were building a fort, a secret hideout from their older sister, Chloe. Karen had just stepped inside to answer a phone call, a mundane interruption that would later stretch into a chasm of regret. The call lasted no more than 10 minutes, but in that brief window of time, the world as she knew it tilted on its axis and spun into chaos. When she returned to the back porch, lemonade glasses in hand, the yard was empty. "Boys, lemonade ready," Karen's voice, initially light and cheerful, carried across the empty lawn. The only response was the rustle of leaves in the gentle afternoon breeze. A flicker of annoyance turned quickly to a prickle of fear. She walked the perimeter of the yard, her calls growing more urgent, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. The gate leading to the front street was latched from the inside. The fence was high, too high for 7-year-olds to climb easily. It was as if they had been plucked from the earth by an unseen hand. David Sullivan, the twins' father, arrived, home from his accounting job, to a scene of escalating panic. Karen's frantic face met him at the door, her words tumbling out in a torrent of fear. "They're gone, David. They're just gone." Together, they combed the neighborhood, their shouts of Liam, Noah, becoming a desperate mantra chanted into the twilight. Neighbors emerged from their homes, their faces etched with concern, offering to help search the familiar streets and cul-de-sacs. But as darkness fell, blanketing the quiet suburb in a shroud of deep blue, the boys were nowhere to be found. The initial police response was swift, treating the case as a potential abduction. From the outset, patrol cars silently cruised the streets, their searchlights cutting sharp, anxious beams across manicured lawns and darkened windows. The idyllic neighborhood of Havenwood Heights suddenly felt menacing, every shadow holding a potential threat. Detective Miles Corbin of the Medford Police Department was assigned as the lead investigator, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the maelstrom of emotions consuming the Sullivan family. He had seen many things in his 20 years on the force, but the complete absence of evidence in this case was unsettlingly unique. Detective Corbin remembers the scene vividly. The backyard was pristine, almost sterile. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints other than those of the family, no discarded items, no broken latches. The twins' brightly colored plastic shovels and buckets lay abandoned near a small mound of dirt under the oak tree, a silent testament to their interrupted play. It was this lack of any discernible clue, any thread to pull, that would become the frustrating hallmark of the investigation for years to come. The boys had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a profound and terrifying silence. In the days that followed, the search expanded, drawing in hundreds of volunteers from across the state. They scoured local parks, dense woodlands bordering the neighborhood, and murky riverbanks. The faces of Liam and Noah, smiling and vibrant in their school photos, were plastered on every lamppost and storefront window. The media descended on Medford, their satellite trucks lining the Sullivan Street, turning a private tragedy into a public spectacle. Through it all, Karen and David moved like ghosts, their faces hollowed out by grief and sleepless nights. Clinging to a fragile sliver of hope, Chloe Sullivan, just 12 at the time, retreated into a shell of silence. The sudden disappearance of her boisterous younger brothers had ripped a hole in her world. She was interviewed by police, her soft voice barely a whisper, as she recounted the last time she saw them, squabbling playfully over a toy soldier. She remembered feeling a flash of annoyance, a feeling she would replay in her mind with crushing guilt for years. Her last words to them were not of love or affection, but of sibling frustration, a memory that would become her own private burden to bear. The community of Medford rallied around the Sullivans, organizing vigils and fundraisers. Yellow ribbons, a symbol of hope for the missing, adorned every tree on their block. Yet, as weeks turned into months, the initial flurry of activity began to wane. The news crews packed up and left for the next breaking story. The volunteers returned to their own lives. For the Sullivans, however, time had stopped on that hot July afternoon. They were trapped in a perpetual state of waiting, their lives defined by the gaping absence of their sons. Detective Corbin couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was right there, tantalizingly close, yet hidden in plain sight. He and his team investigated every angle, from family disputes to known offenders in the area, but every lead turned into a dead end. The case grew cold, a file thick with reports, but barren of conclusions, eventually landing on the shelf with other unsolved mysteries. For 11 long years, the disappearance of Liam and Noah Sullivan remained a painful, open wound in the heart of Medford, a chilling local legend of the two boys who vanished from their own backyard, that is, until the ground itself was ready to give up its secret. The years following the twins' disappearance were a blur of muted colors and hollow sounds for Karen and David Sullivan. The vibrant chaos of a home with young boys was replaced by an oppressive, suffocating silence. Every unopened bedroom door, every toy left gathering dust, was a constant, painful reminder of their loss. They kept the boys' room exactly as it was on that July day, a shrine of arrested development. 2 small beds remained perfectly made, superhero posters still adorned the walls, and a collection of colorful building blocks sat half-assembled on the floor, awaiting hands that would never return. This preservation was a ritual of hope, but also a daily torment. David Sullivan threw himself into his work with a desperate intensity. The neat columns of numbers on his spreadsheets a welcome, orderly distraction from the chaos in his mind. He worked long hours, often returning home late into the night, unable to face the quiet emptiness of his house. He and Karen, once a unit bound by shared joy and laughter, found themselves drifting apart, isolated in their individual seas of grief. Their conversations became stilted, revolving around the practicalities of life rather than the emotional turmoil that churned beneath the surface. The unspoken question of what if hung permanently in the air between them. Karen, on the other hand, became a reluctant warrior in the world of missing children. She dedicated her life to the search, working tirelessly with national organizations. Her son's face is a constant presence on websites and television programs dedicated to the lost. She learned the language of investigation, of DNA databases and age progression photos. This crusade gave her a sense of purpose, a way to channel her agony into action. Yet, with every passing year, the hope that flickered within her grew dimmer, the flame struggling to survive against the relentless wind of time. The emotional toll was immense, etching fine lines of sorrow around her eyes and mouth. Chloe Sullivan navigated her teenage years under the long, dark shadow of her brother's absence. At school, she was the girl whose brothers disappeared, a label that clung to her like a second skin. She felt a profound sense of survivor's guilt, a feeling that she didn't deserve happiness, while her brother's fate remained unknown. She built walls around herself, finding it difficult to form close friendships, always feeling like an outsider looking in. The carefree innocence of her childhood had been stolen, replaced by an adult's understanding of loss and fear, far too early in her life. Detective Miles Corbin officially retired from the Medford Police Department in 2022, but the Sullivan case followed him into his quiet new life. It was the one case that had truly burrowed under his skin, a puzzle he could never solve. He kept a box of files at his home, a private and unauthorized extension of the official investigation. Late at night, with a glass of whiskey by his side, he would sift through the old reports, the witness statements, the maps of the search area, hoping to spot something he had missed, some tiny detail that could unlock the entire mystery. The faces of Liam and Noah, forever 7 in his memory, were his constant, silent companions. The Sullivan house on Havenwood Heights, once a symbol of suburban bliss, slowly transformed into a house of sorrow. The once vibrant garden grew untended, and the paint on the porch began to peel. Neighbors, who had once been so supportive, began to look away, unsure of what to say, their own lives having moved on. The yellow ribbons tied to the trees faded under the sun and were eventually removed, one by one. The house became a landmark of local tragedy, a place children on bicycles would point to and whisper about. The the story of the vanished twins already morphing into a ghost story. Over the years, a few sporadic leads would surface, each one a torturous cycle of hope and despair for the Stevens. A reported sighting in another state would turn out to be a case of mistaken identity. A psychic's vision would lead police on a fruitless dig in a remote forest. A deathbed confession from a prison inmate proved to be a cruel, fabricated lie. Each false alarm was like reopening the wound, a fresh wave of grief that left them emotionally battered and exhausted. The roller coaster of emotions was almost as draining as the constant, gnawing uncertainty. The media's interest would be briefly rekindled on the anniversary of the disappearance each July. A local news reporter would stand outside the Sullivan home, delivering a somber piece about the enduring mystery. They would re-air old footage of the frantic search, interview a retired detective Corbin who would offer the same grim assessment, and perhaps, if she was up to it, secure a few pained words from Karen. For the Sullivans, it was a painful public ritual, a reminder that their personal tragedy had become a piece of morbid public fascination. In 2023, 12 years after the boys vanished, David and Karen made the heart-wrenching decision to sell their home. The house was too full of ghosts, every corner saturated with memories that were both precious and agonizing. They needed a fresh start, a new place that wasn't defined by loss. They sold it for a fraction of its market value to a young couple, eager to move on. Packing up the boys' room was the hardest thing they had ever had to do. A final, heartbreaking admission that Liam and Noah were not coming home. It felt like a betrayal, another layer of finality they weren't ready for. They moved to a small apartment across town, a sterile, anonymous space where the past couldn't ambush them at every turn. Chloe, now a young woman of 23, moved to Portland for college, seeking her own escape. The family, once a tight-knit unit, was now fractured and scattered. The decade of silence had taken its toll, leaving behind a landscape of quiet devastation. They had found no answers, no closure, only the relentless passage of time and the cold, hard reality of their unresolved loss. They believed the move would close a chapter, but they had no idea that a new one was about to be forcefully ripped open. Ben and Sarah Carter were a young couple full of optimism, their future as bright and promising as the Oregon summer. They had been saving for years to buy their first home, a place to put down roots and maybe one day raise a family of their own. The house on Havenwood Heights was a steal, a spacious property with what realtors politely called good bones. They were aware of the home's tragic history, of course. The seller's disclosure was stark, and the story was infamous in Medford. But they were practical people, not given to superstition. To them, it was just a house, a structure of wood and nails that held no memory of its own. The first few months were a whirlwind of activity. Ben, a skilled contractor, saw the house as a blank canvas, a project he could pour his heart into. He and Sarah spent their weekends tearing down old wallpaper, sanding floors, and painting walls in warm, inviting colors. They wanted to chase away the lingering sadness of the house, to fill it with their own laughter and the smell of freshly baked bread. They were determined to create a home filled with light and life, to reclaim it from the shadows of its past. The physical labor was cathartic, a way of making the space truly their own. Sarah had a passion for gardening. The backyard, which had become a tangle of overgrown weeds and neglected rose bushes, was her domain. She envisioned a vibrant oasis of flowers and vegetables, a place for summer barbecues and quiet morning coffees. She spent hours digging, planting, and pruning, slowly taming the wilderness that had taken over. The massive oak tree in the center of the yard became her favorite feature, its gnarled branches offering a canopy of shade. She felt a sense of peace working in the yard, the rhythmic toil of her hands in the soil, a form of meditation. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in late May of 2025, nearly 11 years after the Sullivan twins had disappeared. Ben was in the backyard, working on his most ambitious project yet, a new stone patio. He planned to replace the cracked concrete slab near the back door with elegant, modern paving stones. This required him to dig down several inches to lay a proper foundation of gravel and sand. The sun beat down on his back as he worked, the air thick with the scent of freshly turned earth and blooming jasmine from Sarah's garden. As he drove his shovel into the compacted soil near the base of the old oak tree, he was met with a dull, metallic thud. It was a jarring sound, different from the soft scrape of a rock or root. Frowning, Ben knelt and dug around the obstruction with his hands. His fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular, its surface cold and unyielding beneath the dirt. Curiosity piqued. He worked the shovel around the object's edges, carefully loosening the earth that had held it captive for so long. It felt solid, heavy, and undeniably man-made. After several minutes of careful digging, he was able to pry the object from its earthen grave. It was a child's lunchbox, made of metal, its once bright red paint now faded and flecked with rust. A faded sticker of a cartoon rocket ship was still partially visible on the lid. Ben's heart gave a strange little flutter. He knew, instinctively, that this was not something that had been lost recently. The way it had been buried, deep and deliberate, suggested it had been hidden. He wiped the dirt from its surface, his mind racing, the house's grim history suddenly feeling very present. He called out to Sarah, his voice a little strained. "Hey, Sarah, you're going to want to see this." She came over from her flower beds, wiping her brow with the back of a muddy glove. Her eyes widened as she saw the old lunchbox resting on the grass. The air around them suddenly felt charged, the cheerful sounds of the neighborhood fading into the background. They both knew the stories. They both knew who had lived here before them. A child's lunchbox, buried in the backyard, could not be an innocent discovery. With a sense of trepidation, Ben fiddled with the rusted latch. It was stiff, sealed shut by years of moisture and compacted earth. He had to use the edge of his trowel to pry it open. It gave way with a groan of protesting metal, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet yard. They both held their breath, peering inside as Ben slowly lifted the lid. The interior was dark and smelled of damp earth and decay. It was not empty. Nestled inside on a bed of rotted fabric was a small collection of objects. The sight of the contents sent a chill down Ben's spine despite the afternoon heat. There was a single, green plastic toy soldier, its rifle bent at an odd angle. Beside it lay a small, smooth riverstone, painted to look like a ladybug, and underneath that, a folded, yellowed piece of paper. These were not random trinkets. They felt personal, like the treasured possessions of a small child. The deliberate nature of the burial, the careful placement of the items, felt like a message left for someone to find. But it was the last item that made Sarah gasp and take a step back. Tucked into the corner of the lunchbox was a small, tarnished, silver locket. Ben picked it up carefully. It was heart-shaped, and as he wiped away the grime, a single, elegantly engraved initial became visible on its surface. It was not an L for Liam, or an N for Noah. The initial was a C. They stood there for a long moment. The forgotten lunchbox opened before them, a Pandora's box of secrets unearthed. Ben knew immediately what he had to do. He reached for his phone and dialed 911. The arrival of the Medford Police Department shattered the weekend tranquility of Havenwood Heights once again. A single patrol car appeared first, followed by an unmarked sedan carrying a detective. The sight of police tape being carefully strung around the old oak tree was a jarring echo of the past, drawing curious neighbors from their homes. For those who had lived on the street for more than a decade, it was a chilling case of déjà vu. The Sullivan house, which had just begun to shed its mournful reputation, was once again the center of a grim investigation. Ben and Sarah Carter watched from their porch, feeling like intruders in a story that had begun long before they arrived. Detective Isabella Rossi was now the lead on cold cases for Medford PD. She was sharp, meticulous, and too young to have been on the force when the Sullivan twins first disappeared, but she knew the case file intimately. It was required reading, for any new detective, a cautionary tale about how a case can go wrong. She listened patiently as Ben recounted his discovery, his voice still shaky. She examined the lunchbox and its contents with a professional's dispassionate eye, but inwardly, she felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was the first new piece of physical evidence in the Sullivan case in 11 years. It was a break, and a significant one. The items from the lunchbox were carefully bagged and tagged as evidence. The toy soldier, the painted rock, the folded paper, and the locket. Each item was a potential key, a silent witness that had been waiting to tell its story. The forensics team was called in to excavate the area around the oak tree more thoroughly, searching for any other hidden clues. Detective Rossi understood the weight of this discovery. It was more than just a collection of old trinkets. It was a time capsule, a message deliberately left behind. The crucial question was, by whom, and for what purpose? The first order of business was to contact the Sullivan family. The task fell to Detective Rossi, who found their new number and made the call with a sense of professional gravity. Karen Sullivan answered on the third ring, her voice wary. Rossi identified herself and gently explained that a discovery had been made at their old property. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. For Karen, the word discovery was a loaded gun, capable of firing either a bullet of devastating news or a flare of renewed hope. She agreed to meet with the detective immediately, her voice trembling. Detective Rossi also made another call, this one to a quiet home on the outskirts of Medford. Miles Corbin answered, his voice gruff with retirement. When Rossi explained what had been found, the gruffness vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused tone of a seasoned investigator. A lunchbox, buried by the oak tree, he repeated, a spark of the old fire rekindling within him. He had spent countless hours in that backyard, had walked over that very spot 100 times. The idea that this crucial piece of evidence had been lying just inches beneath his feet all along was both thrilling and maddening. He immediately offered to come down to the station. At the station, the contents of the lunchbox were laid out on a sterile white table in an evidence room. Karen and David Sullivan arrived, their faces pale masks of anxiety. Chloe drove in from Portland, her expression guarded. When Karen saw the red lunchbox, she let out a small, choked sob. That was Liam's, she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. He loved that rocket ship. Noah had a blue one with dinosaurs on it. It was the first concrete link back to her sons, a tangible piece of their childhood returned to her after a decade of aching emptiness. Detective Rossi then showed them the contents, one by one. The toy soldier was familiar. The boys had hundreds of them. The painted rock, however, elicited a specific memory from Chloe. I remember that, she said, her voice barely audible. Noah painted it at a summer camp a week before they went missing. He was so proud of it. The memory was a double-edged sword, a sweet moment from the past, now tainted by the tragedy that followed. It confirmed, without a doubt, that these items belonged to the twins. The folded piece of paper was the next item. A forensics expert had carefully unfolded the brittle, yellowed page. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. The drawing depicted two stick figures, clearly boys, holding hands. They were standing next to a large, simplified drawing of a house with a red door. But it was what was drawn above them that made everyone in the room fall silent. Hovering in the sky was a crudely drawn car, and inside the car, a third stick figure with long, scribbled brown hair was waving. It wasn't a threatening image, but it was deeply strange. Finally, Detective Rossi presented the silver locket. She held it up for them to see the engraved C. Karen and David stared at it, confused. We've never seen this before, David said, shaking his head. It wasn't theirs, and we didn't know anyone who would give them something like this. All eyes in the room then turned to Chloe. She stared at the locket, her face unreadable. The C was for her. Why would a locket with her initial be buried with her brother's most treasured possessions? The question hung in the sterile air of the evidence room, heavy and unanswered. Chloe finally spoke, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. It's not mine, she said, her gaze fixed on the locket. I've never seen it before in my life. Her denial was firm, but Detective Rossi, a keen observer of human behavior, noticed a subtle tremor in her hand, a flicker of something in her eyes that looked like fear. The discovery of the lunchbox had been intended to bring clarity, but instead, it had unearthed a new layer of mystery. The focus of the investigation, which had always been on an unknown redditor, was now beginning to shift, turning inward toward the secrets held within the Sullivan family itself. The discovery of the lunchbox and its cryptic contents sent shockwaves through the cold case unit. For the first time, they had something tangible that pointed away from the theory of a stranger abduction. The items felt personal, almost ceremonial. The drawing, with its strange depiction of a car and a waving figure, was particularly perplexing. Was it a memory, a fantasy, or a clue left by a child who knew they were in danger? The locket, however, was the most significant and troubling piece of the puzzle. It directly implicated Chloe, tying her to the scene in a way that couldn't be ignored. Detective Rossi and a non-officially consulting Miles Corbin spent hours poring over the original case files, re-examining Chloe's initial interviews from 2014. At 12 years old, her testimony had been that of a typical older sister. She was in her room, listening to music, annoyed that her brothers were being loud outside. She claimed she never saw or heard anything unusual until her mother began to panic. Her story was simple, consistent, and corroborated by her parents, but viewed through the new lens of the discovered locket, her testimony now seemed unnervously convenient. Rossi decided to dig deeper into the Sullivan family's life around the time of the disappearance. This wasn't about casting blame, but about understanding the full context of the environment. She initiated discreet interviews with old neighbors, former teachers, and family friends. A picture began to emerge of a family that, while outwardly perfect, was under considerable strain. David Sullivan's accounting firm was struggling financially, a fact he had hidden from his wife. Karen was reportedly feeling overwhelmed by the demands of raising 3 children, including 2 hyperactive, 7-year-old boys. These were common domestic pressures, but in a major criminal investigation, nothing could be overlooked. A former teacher from the twins' elementary school provided a particularly interesting piece of information. She recalled that in the weeks leading up to their disappearance, Chloe had become unusually withdrawn and protective of her brothers. It was a sudden change, the teacher, Mrs. Albright, recounted. She used to find them annoying, as older siblings often do, but then she started walking them to their classroom every morning, hovering over them in the playground. I remember thinking it was sweet, but in hindsight, it felt more like she was afraid of something. This detail was never in the original police report. The forensics lab, meanwhile, was meticulously examining the items from the lunchbox. They found no usable fingerprints on the locket or the other items, the years underground having erased any viable prints. However, the analysis of the paper the drawing was on yielded a breakthrough. It was a specific type of art paper, from a brand that was sold exclusively in a regional craft store chain called Artisan's Nook. More importantly, the chemical composition of the crayons used matched a set that had been a promotional giveaway at that same store during the summer of 2014. This provided a potential location and a tighter time frame for when the drawing was made. Detective Rossi decided it was time to interview Chloe again, this time with a more direct line of questioning. She met with her at a neutral location, a small coffee shop in Portland. Chloe was visibly on edge, her hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug. Rossi began gently, talking about the discovery and the pain it must be dredging up for her family. She then carefully placed a high-resolution photo of the locket on the table between them. "Chloe," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we need you to be completely honest with us. This locket is important. Have you ever seen it before?" Chloe stared at the photo, her jaw tightening. For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the coffee shop as if looking for an escape. "I told you, I haven't," she finally said, her voice a little too sharp. "Why do you keep asking me about it? It has nothing to do with me." Her defensiveness was a red flag for Rossi. It wasn't the reaction of someone who was merely confused. It was the reaction of someone who was hiding something. Rossi decided to press harder, mentioning the teacher's account of her sudden protectiveness over the twins. At the mention of her behavior in 2014, Chloe's composure finally cracked. Her eyes welled up with tears, and her carefully constructed walls began to crumble. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You think I hurt them. That's what this is about, isn't it?" She pushed the photo of the locket away from her, a wave of anguish washing over her face. The raw emotion felt genuine, but Rossi knew that grief and guilt could be powerful motivators for deception. She needed the truth, not just tears. "We don't think you hurt them, Chloe," Rossi said, her tone softening, "but we think you know more than you're telling us. The drawing, the locket, they tell a story. We need you to help us read it. Who was the person in the car, Chloe, who gave you that locket?" The questions hung in the air, a direct challenge to the version of events Chloe had maintained for over a decade. The foundation of the original investigation was cracking, and Rossi sensed that Chloe was the one holding the hammer. Chloe stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back slightly. "I have to go," she stammered, fumbling for her bag. "I can't do this." She fled the coffee shop, leaving Detective Rossi sitting alone with the photograph of the locket. The interview had failed to produce a confession, but it had succeeded in confirming Rossi's suspicion. Chloe Sullivan was lying. Her fear was palpable. The mystery of what happened to Liam and Noah was inextricably linked to a secret their sister had been keeping for 11 years, a secret she was still terrified to reveal. Chloe's panicked flight from the coffee shop was a turning point. It transformed her from a grieving sibling into a person of intense interest. Detective Rossi knew she couldn't force Chloe to talk, but she could investigate the world around her, both past and present. The focus now shifted to the two most concrete clues they had: the craft store, Artisan's Nook, and the mysterious silver locket. Rossi assigned 2 junior detectives to canvass every Artisan's Nook location within a 50-mile radius of Medford, a tedious but necessary task. They were to show photos of the Sullivan family and the locket to any long-term employees. Meanwhile, Miles Corbin, acting as Rossi's unofficial partner, decided to tackle the locket from a different angle. He started by visiting local jewelers and pawn shops, places he had checked 11 years prior, but this time he had the actual object, or at least high-quality photos of it. He was looking for anyone who recognized the specific design or the unique style of the engraving on the C. It was a long shot, but Corbin was a believer in old-fashioned police work. He felt the locket was not just a random trinket, but a key, a token with a history. The investigation into Artisan's Nook yielded its first small victory. An older employee at a store in the neighboring town of Ashland recognized Chloe's picture. "Oh, I remember her," the woman said, peering at the photo over her glasses. "She used to come in here quite a bit that summer, usually with her mum, but sometimes she'd come in with another lady, a younger woman, very friendly. They seemed close." This was new information. Karen had never mentioned Chloe having a close friendship with an unknown woman. The employee couldn't remember the woman's name, but she remembered a distinct detail. The woman always wore a delicate silver bracelet with several small charms on it. Back in the evidence room, Rossi and Corbin stared at the child's drawing again, the image taking on new meaning. The stick figure in the car with the long brown hair, could this be the mystery woman from the craft store? The drawing, once seen as a child's fantasy, now looked like a potential depiction of a real person. The car with the red door, was it a house or a vehicle? Children's art is notoriously ambiguous. If it was a car, the red door was a specific, memorable feature. They initiated a search of DMV records for red cars registered in the area in 2014. A monumental and likely fruitless task, but one that had to be undertaken. Karen and David Sullivan were brought in again and shown the drawing under this new light. Karen was baffled by the story of the mystery woman. Chloe didn't have any friends like that, she insisted, her brow furrowed in confusion. Her best friend was Jessica from down the street. "I can't imagine who this woman could be," David agreed, shaking his head. The idea that their daughter had a secret friendship, a secret life they knew nothing about, was deeply unsettling. It felt like another layer of deception, another crack in the family foundation they thought they knew. The real breakthrough, however, came from Miles Corbin's painstaking legwork. At a small, dusty jewelry repair shop on the far side of town, an elderly jeweler named Mr. Abramowitz peered at the photo of the locket through his loupe. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "I remember this," he said, his voice raspy with age. "Not this exact locket, but the style. It's the work of a local artist, a woman named Isabella Rivas. She made custom pieces. Very talented, but she closed up shop many years ago." He had an old address for her last known workshop. The name Isabella Rivas meant nothing to the Sullivans, but it was a solid lead, the first real name attached to the mystery. Detective Rossi ran the name through every database she had access to. She found a driver's license photo for an Isabella Rivas from 2014. The woman in the photo was in her late 20s, with kind eyes and long dark brown hair, just like the figure in the drawing and the description from the craft store employee. Rossi felt a surge of excitement. The pieces were starting to connect. The address for Isabella's old workshop led them to a dilapidated storefront in an industrial part of Medford. It was long since abandoned. However, property records showed that Isabella Rivas had sold the building in late 2014, just a few months after the twins disappeared. Her current whereabouts were unknown. She seemed to have dropped off the map. Rossi put out a bolubi on the lookout for Isabella Rivas, not as a suspect, but as a material witness. She was the link between Chloe and the locket. With this new information, Rossi knew she had the leverage she needed to get the truth from Chloe. She drove to Portland herself, finding Chloe at her small apartment near the university campus. This time, there would be no coffee shop, no gentle questioning. Rossi laid out the evidence on the kitchen table: the photo of Isabella Rivas, the statement from the craft store employee, The information from the jeweler. We know about Isabella, Chloe, Rossi said, her voice leaving no room for argument. We know she gave you the locket. It's time to tell us why. Chloe stared at the face of Isabella Rivas, and all the fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and a sob escaped her lips, a sound of grief and fear that had been held back for 11 long years. I'm so sorry, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I was so scared. She made me promise not to tell anyone. She said it was our secret. The secret that had poisoned her life for over a decade was finally coming to the surface. The identity of the woman in the drawing was no longer a mystery, but her role in the disappearance of Liam and Noah was about to open up a terrifying new chapter in the investigation. The confession, when it finally came, poured out of Chloe in a torrent of guilt-ridden words and ragged sobs. The story she told was not one of malice or betrayal, but of a secret friendship and a misplaced trust that had led to an unimaginable tragedy. Isabella Rivas had been her art teacher for a summer program at a local community center in 2014. She was charismatic, kind, and paid special attention to Chloe, praising her artistic talents and making her feel seen and special in a way she hadn't felt before. For a lonely 12-year-old girl, overshadowed by her energetic younger brothers, Isabella's attention was intoxicating. Chloe explained that their friendship had grown outside the classroom. Isabella would sometimes pick her up, and they would go to the artisan's nook or for ice cream. It was their secret, a special bond that Chloe cherished. Isabella was the cool, older friend she'd always wanted. She told me my parents didn't really understand me, but she did, Chloe recounted, her voice trembling. She made me feel like an adult, like we were equals. This grooming, so subtle and insidious, had made Chloe fiercely loyal to Isabella, willing to keep their friendship hidden from her parents. The locket, Chloe confessed, was a gift from Isabella. She gave it to me a week before it happened, Chloe said. She said it was a symbol of our special friendship, a secret keeper. The locket was meant for her, but one afternoon, Liam and Noah had found it in her jewelry box. They were fascinated by it and had borrowed it for one of their secret backyard adventures, tucking it away with their other treasures. Chloe had been angry at them for taking it, another secret her brothers had inadvertently become part of. On the day of the disappearance, July 15, 2014, Chloe told the police the truth she had been hiding for 11 years. Isabella Rivas had shown up at their house unannounced. Her parents weren't home. Chloe was inside, but the boys were playing in the backyard. Isabella had a strange, frantic energy about her that day. She told Chloe she had a wonderful surprise for the twins, a special trip, and that she wanted to take them for a few hours. She said she would bring them right back. Chloe cried. She said it would be our little adventure. Trusting Isabella implicitly, a 12-year-old Chloe had allowed her to go into the backyard. She watched from her bedroom window as Isabella, her supposed friend, talked to Liam and Noah. The boys knew Isabella through Chloe and were excited to see her. Chloe saw them laughing, saw Isabella point towards the street. Then, she watched as her two younger brothers willingly walked with Isabella out of the backyard, through the side gate that was usually kept locked, and towards a car parked down the street. It was a red sedan. Chloe saw them get in, and Isabella gave a little wave back towards the house before driving away. The figure in the drawing was Isabella, waving goodbye. She made me promise not to say anything, Chloe sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her confession. She said it was a surprise for my parents too, and that if I told them, I would ruin it and get into terrible trouble. I was scared. I believed her. When her mother came home and the panic began, Chloe was paralyzed by fear and confusion. Her secret friend had become a kidnapper, and her lie had spiraled into a nightmare. By the time she realized the gravity of what had happened, it was too late to tell the truth without incriminating herself in a terrible way. So she had remained silent, the secret a toxic poison in her soul. Detective Rossi and Miles Corbin listened to the story with a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. There was no struggle because the boys had gone willingly with someone they knew and trusted. The case was not a stranger abduction. It was a betrayal of the highest order. Their focus now shifted entirely to finding Isabella Rivas. She was no longer a person of interest. She was their prime and only suspect. Search for her, which had been a low-level inquiry, was now a full-blown manhunt. The new information transformed the investigation. They now had a name, a face, and a motive. However twisted, They learned that in the summer of 2014, Isabella Rivas was in a dire financial situation and was being evicted from her apartment and workshop. She was also suffering from severe mental health issues. According to a family member they finally located, this relative revealed that Isabella had a fixation on children and had once expressed a delusional belief that she was meant to rescue children from unhappy homes. To her disturbed mind, she may have believed she was saving Liam and Noah, not kidnapping them. The information about Isabella's mental state added a chilling new layer to the mystery. It shifted the possibilities of what might have happened to the twins. Did she harm them in a fit of delusion, or did she truly believe she was their savior? Was it possible that Liam and Noah were still alive somewhere, raised by Isabella under new identities, completely unaware of their real family? This sliver of hope, however faint and terrifying, was the first real hope the Sullivan family had had in over a decade. Armed with Chloe's full confession and a warrant for her arrest, the FBI was brought in to assist in the nationwide search for Isabella Rivas. Her face, once that of a smiling art teacher, was now plastered across national news channels as a wanted kidnapper. The story had exploded, a forgotten cold case roaring back to life with a shocking twist. For the Sullivan family, the revelation was a complex cocktail of emotions: anger at Chloe's deception, fury at Isabella's betrayal, but also a terrifying, fragile hope that after 11 long years, they might finally find out what happened to their boys. The silence was broken, but the answer was still out there, somewhere in the vastness of America. With a woman named Isabella Rivas, the hunt for Isabella Rivas became a national obsession. The story of the art teacher who allegedly befriended a young girl only to abduct her brothers was the stuff of nightmares. A cautionary tale that resonated with parents across the country. The FBI's Violent Crime Task Force took the lead, coordinating with state and local agencies. Isabella's 2014 driver's license photo was everywhere, but detectives knew that after 11 years, her appearance would have changed significantly. Forensic artists worked with Chloe and Isabella's distant relatives to create age-progressed images, speculating on how she might look in her early 40s. Investigators began the painstaking process of digitally excavating Isabella's life. They discovered she was a ghost online. She had no social media presence, no credit card activity under her own name after 2014, and no official records of employment or residence. It was as if she had intentionally erased herself from the grid, a feat that is incredibly difficult to achieve in the modern world. This level of planning and discipline suggested a cunning and forethought that was at odds with the image of a person in a state of frantic delusion. It painted a picture of a suspect who was both methodical and dangerous. The financial trail was the first to yield a clue. FBI analysts discovered that just days before the twins vanished, Isabella had liquidated all of her assets. She sold her Cara blue compact, not the red sedan Chloe remembered, which meant the getaway car was likely stolen or borrowed, and closed her bank accounts, withdrawing over $10,000 in cash. This was not the act of someone planning a short trip. It was the act of someone preparing to start a new life, to disappear completely. The premeditation was chilling and pointed away from a spontaneous, delusional act. Chloe, now cooperating fully with the investigation, became an invaluable resource. She worked with a psychologist to comb through her memories of Isabella, searching for any small detail that might provide a clue to her whereabouts or her mindset. She remembered Isabella talking fondly of the Pacific Northwest, of its dense forests and rugged coastline. She had a romanticized notion of living off the grid, away from the pressures of society. This led investigators to focus their search on remote, sparsely populated areas in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. The public responded with a deluge of tips. Thousands of calls and emails poured into the FBI hotline. Detectives had to meticulously sift through every lead, no matter how outlandish. There were sightings reported from Florida to Alaska, most of them quickly dismissed as false alarms. It was a frustrating process, a search for a needle in a continent-sized haystack. For the Sullivan family, every phone call from Detective Rossi was a source of both hope and dread, a constant, nerve-wracking wait for the news that would change everything. Miles Corbin, despite his retirement, couldn't stay away. He worked from his home office, using his old contacts and deep knowledge of Oregon to follow up on local leads. He focused on the red sedan Chloe remembered. He believed it was a key detail. He spent days scrolling through microfiche of old, newspapers looking for reports of stolen red vehicles in the region around July 2014. It was a grueling, thankless task, but Corbin believed that small, forgotten details were often the ones that broke a case wide open. His dedication was a quiet, steady anchor in the storm of the high-profile federal investigation. A significant break came from an unexpected source. A woman in a small, isolated community in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state saw a news report about the case. The age-progressed sketch of Isabella Rivas struck a chord of familiarity. She recognized the woman as Jane, a quiet, reclusive woman who had lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of their community for several years. Jane had 2 boys, she said, 2 quiet and polite teenage boys who were homeschooled and rarely seen in town. The boys, she estimated, would be around 18 years old. The tip was treated with the highest priority. FBI agents, working with local sheriff's deputies, began a discreet surveillance operation on the remote cabin. The property was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, making a direct approach risky. They needed to be certain before they moved. In from a distance, they observed a woman matching the general description of Isabella. They also spotted 2 young men, 2 boys on the cusp of adulthood, who, from a distance, bore a resemblance to the age-progressed photos of Liam and Noah. The tension was palpable as the surveillance team gathered information. They needed definitive proof. An agent, posing as a lost hiker, managed to get closer to the property and discreetly collected a discarded water bottle from the side of the road near the cabin's driveway. The bottle was rushed to an FBI lab for DNA analysis. The waiting period for the results was excruciating for everyone involved, most of all for Karen and David Sullivan, who were sequestered in a hotel near the command post, their entire world hanging in the balance. The call from the lab came in the pre-dawn hours. The DNA from the water bottle was a match, not to Isabella, but to the DNA profile of Liam Sullivan, taken from a hairbrush collected from his bedroom 11 years ago. They had found him. After more than a decade of silence and uncertainty, one of the vanished twins had been located, but the discovery brought with it a host of new, terrifying questions. Where was his brother, Noah? And what would the agents find when they finally breached the remote cabin in the woods? The ghost of Isabella Rivas was about to become terrifyingly real. The tactical operation began just as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, a soft gray light filtering through the dense canopy of the Washington forest. A heavily armed FBI SWAT team, clad in dark gear, moved with practiced silence through the woods, forming a tight perimeter around the isolated cabin. The air was cold and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot, sounded deafeningly loud in the tense silence. The objective was clear: secure the occupants with minimal force, and, above all, ensure the safety of the 2 young men inside. From their vantage point, the surveillance team had confirmed 3 individuals were in the cabin: the woman they believed to be Isabella Rivas, and the 2 teenage boys. The discovery of Liam's DNA on the water bottle had confirmed at least 1 twin was present. The fate of his brother Noah was still a terrifying unknown. Was the other boy in the cabin Noah? Or was he another victim? Or perhaps even Isabella's biological child? The uncertainty added another layer of complexity and danger to the operation. Using a bullhorn, the lead agent announced their presence, the voice echoing through the quiet woods. Isabella Rivas, this is the FBI. We have the house surrounded. Come out with your hands up. You must come out unarmed. There was no immediate response from within the cabin. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. The agents held their positions, their weapons trained on the small wooden structure. They were prepared for any eventuality, from a peaceful surrender to a violent confrontation. After a few agonizingly long minutes, the cabin door creaked open. The woman, Isabella, stepped out onto the porch, her face pale and drawn. A decade older, but still recognizable from her photos. She looked not like a monster, but like a defeated, tired woman. She raised her hands slowly, her eyes scanning the line of armed agents who had materialized from the trees. She offered no resistance as a team moved in to take her into custody. Her long and desperate flight from justice finally at an end. 2 more figures then appeared in the doorway. 2 tall, lanky teenage boys, their faces etched with confusion and fear. They looked nearly identical, with the same dark hair and Sullivan family eyes. It was them. It was Liam and Noah, no longer 7-year-old children but young men of 18. They stared at the armed agents, at the woman they knew as their mother, being placed in handcuffs, their entire reality crumbling around them in a matter of seconds. The agents approached them cautiously, speaking in calm, reassuring tones. Liam and Noah, or Jacob and Daniel, as they had been known for the past 11 years, were bewildered. They had been raised in isolation, homeschooled by Isabella, their only mother. She had told them they were her children, that they had to live in seclusion to be safe from a dangerous world. Their lives had been quiet, structured, and completely fabricated. To them, the heavily armed men swarming their home were the intruders, and the woman being arrested was their protector. The psychological impact of this revelation was immense and devastating. The reunion with their parents, Karen and David, was arranged at a secure FBI facility a few hours later. It was a moment fraught with unimaginable complexity. Karen and David saw their lost little boys in the faces of these grown men, a miracle they had never dared to truly hope for. They rushed forward, their arms open, tears of joy and relief streaming down their faces. But Liam and Noah flinched, pulling back from these strangers who claimed to be their parents. They were hesitant, scared, their loyalty still tied to the only mother they could remember. The reunion was not a simple, happy ending. It was the beginning of a long and difficult journey of healing. The cabin itself provided a wealth of evidence. It was a time capsule of the twins' stolen childhood. Their rooms were filled with handmade toys and books. Isabella had documented their lives in dozens of photo albums, creating a meticulous record of her fabricated family. In a locked chest, investigators found new identities for all three of them: fake birth certificates and social security cards. They also found journals filled with Isabella's rambling, delusional prose, outlining her belief that she had rescued the boys and given them a pure life. That in her initial interrogation, Isabella was largely uncooperative, retreating into a world of delusion. She maintained that the boys were her sons and that she had saved them. She showed no remorse for the 11 years of pain she had inflicted on the Sullivan family. Her detachment was chilling, the act of a mind that had completely severed its connection with reality. It was clear that the path to justice would be long, and the full story of what motivated her might never be truly understood. For Chloe Sullivan, the news of her brother's safe recovery was a moment of profound relief and crushing guilt. She had been reunited with them briefly, a meeting that was awkward and painful for all involved. They looked at her not as a sister, but as a stranger connected to their trauma. While the world celebrated the miraculous return of the vanished twins, the Sullivan family was just beginning to grapple with the deep wounds of the past. They had found their sons, but the family they had lost 11 years ago could never be fully pieced back together in the same way. The happy ending was, in reality, a profoundly complicated. The aftermath of the rescue was not a fairy tale conclusion, but the start of a grueling and complicated process of readjustment for the entire Sullivan family. Liam and Noah were physically healthy, but the psychological scars of their 11-year ordeal ran deep. They were returned to a world they didn't know, to a family of strangers who looked at them with a mixture of overwhelming love and profound sorrow. The boys, now legally adults, had to navigate a new reality, grieving the loss of the only life they knew, even though that life was built on a lie. Therapy became a central part of their new lives. They worked with specialists in trauma and reunification, both individually and with their family. The sessions were emotionally draining, unearthing years of confusion, manipulation, and suppressed memories. For Liam and Noah, learning to trust Karen and David as their parents was a slow, hesitant process. They had to deconstruct their entire identity to separate the lies of Jane, their captor, from the truth of Isabella Rivas, the kidnapper. It was a monumental task for two young men who had never been given the tools to understand the world. Outside their isolated cabin, the legal proceedings against Isabella Rivas were followed closely by the nation. Her defense attorneys argued for an insanity plea, citing her detailed journals and diagnosed delusional disorders. They painted a picture of a woman who genuinely believed she was acting in the children's best interests. The prosecution, however, pointed to the meticulous planning of the abduction, the liquidation of assets, the creation of false identities as evidence of a rational and criminally responsible mind. The trial became a complex legal battle over the nature of intent and madness. Chloe Sullivan had to face the consequences of her silence, while the district attorney ultimately decided not to press charges against her, given her age at the time, and her cooperation. she faced a trial in the court of public opinion. More painfully, she had to work to rebuild a relationship with her brothers. The bond between them was fractured not just by time, but by the secret she had kept. Forgiveness was not something that could be given easily. It had to be earned through patience, understanding, and a shared commitment to healing the wounds of the past. David and Karen Sullivan found their own relationship tested in new ways. The shared goal that had united them for 11 years, finding their sons, was gone. Now they had to learn how to be parents to two grown men who were strangers to them. They struggled with feelings of guilt, wondering if they had missed signs of their daughter's secret friendship, or their own marital strains that Isabella might have exploited. The joy of having their sons back was tempered by the daily challenges of reconnecting with them across a vast chasm of time and trauma. The media attention eventually faded. Moving on to the next sensational story, the Sullivan family was grateful for the return to privacy, which allowed them to focus on the slow, arduous work of becoming a family again. There were small victories along the way. The first time Noah called Karen Mom without hesitation. The day Liam spent hours talking with David about cars, a shared interest bridging the 11-year gap. These moments were fragile threads, slowly weaving a new family tapestry. In the end, a jury found Isabella Rivas guilty on 2 counts of kidnapping, rejecting the insanity defense. They sentenced her to life in prison, ensuring she would never again have the chance to harm another family. For the Sullivans, the verdict was a form of closure, a final chapter in the legal battle, but they knew that the emotional journey was far from over. Justice had been served in a courtroom, but the truest form of justice would be found in their own ability to heal and move forward. The house on Havenwood Heights remained a quiet monument to the story. Ben and Sarah Carter, the young couple who had unearthed the lunchbox, followed the case with a personal and vested interest. Their simple act of renovating a backyard had set in motion the resolution of one of the state's most enduring mysteries. They received a heartfelt letter from Karen Sullivan, thanking them for giving her back her sons. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest of actions can have the most profound and life-altering consequences. Years later, the Sullivan family found a new kind of normal. Liam pursued a career in forestry, finding peace and solitude in the quiet woods that had once been his prison. Noah, inspired by the legal battle, decided to study law, driven by a desire to help other victims of crime. Chloe became a counselor, specializing in family trauma, using her own painful experience to guide others towards healing. They were not the family they would have been, but they were a family nonetheless, bound together by an extraordinary story of loss, survival, and the enduring power of hope. The story of the Sullivan twins serves as a chilling reminder of the secrets that can lie dormant just beneath the surface of our quiet, everyday lives. It is a testament to the tireless dedication of law enforcement officers like Miles Corbin and Isabella Rossi, who refused to let a cold case die. But most of all, it is a story about the resilience of the human spirit, the unbreakable bond of family, and the profound truth that even after the longest and darkest of nights, the sun will eventually rise again. The road home is never easy, but for the Sullivan family, it was a journey they were finally able to make together.